Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I would like to welcome you to today's program, Connecting Jenkins Pipelines to the XebiaLabs DevOps platform for DevSecOps. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick announcements. Today's program will be followed by a live Q&A, so at any time during the program, you can go to the Questions tab in your control panel, type in the question, and hit Submit, and we'll get to as many as time allows. Secondly, today's program is being recorded, and it'll be available by tomorrow on our website, sttimes.com. As we've been reporting in SD Times, the use of pipelines is essential for organizations looking to work in a DevOps way. But new architectures such as microservices and containers present more surface area for potential attackers. Therefore, DevSecOps is emerging as a way to limit vulnerabilities in the applications. Now, here to talk about these subjects is Vincent Lussenberg. He's a solutions architect at XebiaLabs, which is sponsoring today's program. Vincent's been at XebiaLabs since 2011 in a number of different roles and has worked as a software engineer, Scrum Master, architect, and DevOps consultant in a variety of industries. And now, here's Vincent. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that introduction. And indeed, this is Vincent Lussenberg. I just shared my screen. And I would like to get started by setting the stage. No longer have to read the title to you guys because that was already done just now, so that's great. Just to highlight the housekeeping again, to reiterate that everything is being recorded, and this includes links to the slides as well, and they will be made available to you after the presentation. And again, know that you can use the control panel to post those questions as we move along. Excellent. First about me, although I was already given a graceful introduction, my name is Vincent Lussenberg. Indeed, I have had a number of different roles at XebiaLabs. Right now, I'm focused as working as a solution architect. And in that capacity, I work a lot with prospects that are actually moving towards DevOps, they want to scale up their DevOps because they've ran into some limitations. And usually security is part of the topics as well that we talk about. And of course, I talk to our existing customers as well, make sure that whatever they have of challenges onboarding DevSecOps into their process, that we are sure to address that. Of course, there's a lot of stage to be set regarding DevSecOps as a whole, but I do want to quickly highlight what our company XebiaLabs is all about. So we've been around for about 10 years. So actually a little bit before the term DevOps was really coined and really popular. We already were in the market with software in the space that was to be a DevOps. And what we really focus on, our platform allows enterprises to onboard DevOps. So we really focus on those Fortune 200. And we do not only focus on automating a lot of steps into that process. Everyone knows that DevOps is about a lot of automation. We focus on enterprise concerns as well, such as compliancy, intelligence, control, maintainability, and again, at the very largest of scale. So the right-hand side, you see some of the customers that we have. Indeed, these are the largest companies, very large scale. So indeed, top Fortune 100 companies. We have a global presence. Analysts recognize us as top ranked in our space, application release automation. So we've been doing this for a long time. And as such, we have quite a number of insights actually onboarding DevOps, with best practices as well as our platform that allows you to move forward quickly using that. As was introduced before, we have a specific focus. It's not just about DevSecOps today. We focus as well how to connect that to your Jenkins. So Jenkins is the most popular CI tool that's out there, and a lot of dev teams use that to build their development pipelines. And it's really great at what it does. It's an automation server that really specializes in taking your source code and automatically creating the binaries or the Docker images so that you can promote them as part of your release process. However, it doesn't do everything for you. So what Kosuke, the CTO of CloudBees, already announced in the keynote at Jenkins World 2018 is that they're working on a number of areas. Some of them are prone to security vulnerabilities because of their design, and that's not necessarily, it is a thing that they're always improving, but them being focused at the beginning of the pipeline, continuous integration, makes that something that you can address in different ways as you connect it to our platform. Our platform is not focused on continuous integration, not really building the software, but more taking it to your next stages. So it's very complementary to Jenkins, and having both parts visualized in the same one-stop shop, the same solution, adds a lot of value for things that I mentioned before. For enterprise intelligence, visibility, allows you to automate and go faster. To highlight a little bit more why we're talking about DevSecOps is basically the fact that security is in a state of crisis, which is slightly exaggerated, but it is partially really that they're in a very tough position. There's a very inequitable distribution of labor in IT, and as you see, the ratio of developers to ops people to security folk is or an order of magnitude. So there's just one security guy or gal that basically has the responsibility to set out a certain strategy to make sure that all the code that's being written by those 100 developers are kept into check. So remember, basically back in 2010, we saw that using Agile, we were going a lot faster. Software was being released every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks. But what we saw as well, that ops had a really, really hard time basically handling that new pace of software delivery. So what happened in the beginning, as Agile was going more towards production, non-production ready software would actually be released into production, which led into those ops people, which again, there's an order of magnitude less of these ops people to be paged at 2 in the morning, having to address all these kind of maintainability problems. And that's why as the industry moved forward, so past 2010, you saw the rise of a lot more as code solutions in the ops space as well. Think of infrastructure as code, making sure that your environment is very easy, it's immutable, it's very easily to stand up, to make sure that your networking is stored as configuration as well. So remove all that manual work on server so that ops actually is able to basically move at the pace of the software that's being delivered to them, as well as making sure that they're scanning not just really as a person through their checklist, but making sure that that checklist is actually embedded in automation as well, so that they can actually handle multiple deliveries a day instead of having a specific person looking at that. Now, a lot of you might remember that situation. Now, think about security in this context, and they are in a worse situation than security was a decade ago from a certain point of view. The risk, if they miss something scanning the software that is being released, is potentially a lot higher. What we see as well is that security checklists are often unintelligible. So that means you're not going to be a popular guy in the organization if you're going to wait all the way to the end of a delivery and then come with your basically laundry list of unintelligible items that are very jargony, hand them to the developers that are accustomed to working with user stories and just expecting them to fix that and just being very hard-nosed about that. It's very late in the process, and one of the things that you want to do is get knowledge out of the head of the security people. It's very obvious that you can't scale this. You can't do this with human power because you only have one security person for 100 developers. So the knowledge needs to get out of their head and more into the DevOps pipeline. So let's explore that a little bit more. First of all, this is something that is addressed by the security community already. So Stephen Malovin is one of the very influential people that originally wrote the first, the real Bible on firewalls. And in his Thinking Security book from 2015, he writes that companies are spending a great deal on security, but we read of massive computer-related attacks anyway. Clearly something is wrong. The root of the problem, he suspects, is twofold. We're protecting the wrong things and we're hurting productivity in the process. So some of the anecdotes that I've shared with you already point that out. For example, the productivity of being that guy with an unintelligible laundry list of items. And protecting the wrong things, because apparently with all the protection that's being put in place, computer-related attacks are still happening. So maybe we're protecting not enough, or things that are not really effective. So it's really important to start broadening the horizon and see, okay, what are the things that we really need to look at as a security community? So this is a trend that is happening. Just a little terminology. We've been talking about DevSecOps, but what I'd like to underline is that it's nothing else than the extension of the DevOps culture for the inclusion of security. The question that I sometimes get is that, okay, so it's in the middle, so that means development has to hand it off to security and then to ops. That's the only misnomer here in this abbreviation of DevSecOps. So you can write it as SecDevOps or DevOpsSec as well, as you prefer. It doesn't really imply a specific order here. So security needs to be part of your entire overall pipeline, not just in the middle or the end. It needs to be at all the different places. And I have a really nice visualization to help us visualize that. This is actually really useful as you're thinking about security in your organization, and hopefully some of the people that are on the webinar today are thinking of going faster with DevOps. They might have some security teams that have questions that are saying, no, you really wouldn't be able to do that because we need to go through our checklists. And even sharing an overview like this is really already a signal of, hey, audit team, security team, we hear your concern. You're set up for failure right now. And that is a responsibility of everyone in the, everyone that's part of the stakeholders that's driving this process forward, to improve this in such a situation that we are handling this inequitable distribution of labor here. So what are we seeing right here? We're seeing in the middle of this slide very basically standard CI/CD pipeline, a DevOps pipeline, where we see multiple stages that we might go through multiple times a day. So we basically see all the way from the beginning that there are developers working on their backlog, that the release orchestration process that we're talking about, that our platform is focused as well, starts all the way there. So really that soup to nuts process. And this is really where you want to think about security as well. Of course, we know about things that we need to store code in SCM and automatically monitor our branches, do code analysis to make sure that there are no flaws in the code. Build it through continuous integration, of course, Jenkins being an example of that, working with repositories and so on, all the way to actually landing in production, interacting with monitoring tools, maybe ticketing solutions to make sure that the change requests are open and closed and updated and things like that. But as we think about security, like I mentioned before, it really needs to be embedded across the pipeline, not just the beginning, the end, or the middle. What we're seeing right now a lot is that security is really at the end of the process, where it's really focused on a lot of monitoring in production. So this is not something that you can stop. It's still something that needs to be done. So anything that you're running in production, you still want to actively scan that automatically, monitor the logs for any attacks that are coming in, and as well make sure that you rescan for vulnerabilities, which is an impact on the rest of the pipeline as well. So classically, this was a really hard thing to do. If you're running an application, it might be a couple of years old. Every day, new vulnerabilities are reported. And as software engineering progresses, a lot of libraries are being used. So a vulnerability that's discovered in a specific library can have implications for your entire landscape there. So it means you need to think about your patching, your dependency tracking, which is more to the bottom right. And this is actually something that deployment automation can help you with. So examples here is, as a platform, we really focus on integrating security tools that help you to do these activities. So for example, as part of your CMDB that contains all your applications that are running in production, It's very easy to have solutions integrating with the pipeline that update that as you deploy to the various stages, as well as have the vulnerability rescan basically on a daily basis in case you're running something in production that has new vulnerabilities. You can use your deployment automation to automatically check if there is a new dependency. Maybe you use something in dev and test and you promote it to UAT, and that day there's actually a new vulnerability that came out. That is actually something that you want to address in your pipeline. And our platform allows you to integrate solutions. And I don't want to basically sprinkle a lot of different brand names in there, but there are solutions out there that we integrate with, allow you to basically do a check before you do a deployment to make sure that a certain binary doesn't have a specific vulnerability addressed. The plain vanilla static and dynamic code analysis, this is what most of the people think of as we're thinking about security, is something that of course needs to happen as well. And you want to do that as early as possible in the process as well. This is where we can really start talking about Jenkins pipelines as well. Because a lot of companies work in a sort of a Git flow model. So that means as they're working on functionality, developers create certain branches of the mainline code, and they're working on their features there. Jenkins allows you to automatically create build jobs for those branches, so you don't have to do anything for that. Jenkins just sees those branches and starts building the code that's on there. And what we're able to visualize for you as well is basically the progression of code vulnerabilities on those different branches. And that's something that I'm definitely going to show to you as part of the demonstration. On the top left, I do want to highlight as well things that don't specifically have to do with what I'm going to show you in a little bit, but it's really important as you start thinking about security in your pipeline, is to integrate that into your sprint planning, reviews, and planning as well. So think about, for example, evil use cases, as people call it. So really thinking in the mind of a hacker, someone that wants to bring services of your company down to basically hurt your reputation, to really focus on basically for every microservice seeing, okay, what's the approach factor here? Is this something that would hurt the reputation of my company a lot? This allows some of the knowledge that is part of that security person to basically get into the requirements of the applications. So as you use test-driven development as well to test these evil use cases to make sure that they're covered off, that there's no way to get into that system. Instead of having to talk to the security guy every time to have that knowledge because he analyzed that application, you're making sure that is more part not only of the team, but actually of the living tests that that team creates. So it's something that's being tested each and every time that you do a build. And that really brings security into your pipeline. Only thing we haven't talked about is the middle of the screen where you see security use cases, fuzzing, and load testing. These are more pretty standard approaches of security that a lot of companies do right now. And these are usually, if you only do those, they can be kind of too late. As well as release orchestration allows you to do that in earlier stages versus if you're more following a waterfall process. So security use cases can be really focused on running against a running system. So some of the things on the left-hand side, they're done while the software is still being built. So it's source code scanning. Not that much running against actually a running system. So some of the security factors you can only explore when you actually run that application. And that's really that middle where you classically focus on doing various security scanning, which you can do in an automated as well. Actually run the tools that the hackers are running as part of your process and make sure that the reports that they're generating do not contain any new flaws. Fuzzing is sending lots of erroneous character sets of data, gigabytes worth of it into your application to see what will happen if it still works. And load testing in general. You would say that has more to do with availability, maintainability, but actually if you can overload a system in a certain way, that is a security vulnerability as well, because it can bring reputation damage to your company. Microservices play a role in this as well. They present a number of possibilities because as you're onboarding microservices, you can basically put all of these services in their own little bulkheads. That basically is a way of designing your architecture in such a way if a specific component of your system fails, that a specific section of your virtual ship catches fire, that it doesn't take the entire ship down with it. This is something that's important for security as well, because you want to make sure that not even if that service specifically goes down, but as well as an attacker gets into a low security risk or exposure service, that they can't frog across to other services that have a higher security rating. So all of these things can be onboarded in an automatic way, can be addressed as far as possible into the beginning of the pipeline, so that these things do not get exposed just at the end, and that the security guy needs to come up with that unintelligible laundry list, bringing a lot of delays there. Cool. And this results in, on the bottom of the slide, audit and compliance data being delivered in real time. So this is just something that allows you to really do DevSecOps in your company by making that part of the pipeline. Of course, we need to explore how that specifically looks in our platform. This is one of the things that I want to address here, is that these security is not optional for large enterprises, right? So we have 4 different customer stories here that specifically have to do with how they are using Jenkins. For example, General Electric has been a customer for us for a long time. They are basically powering the front end of their software development process using Jenkins. They tried to script out a lot of the deployments and the logic after that as well. They found themselves in a situation where there was a lot of software sitting on the shelf to be released. So they researched several vendors and they chose our platform to streamline and mainly standardize their DevOps processes. So what you generally see is that you might allow for a bit more variability in Jenkins, as there are different ways to build your software, but you want to standardize on the subsequent DevOps processes. Just like the standard, they actually managed to move away from a whole jungle of Jenkins jobs that did a whole bunch of different things and created one pipeline to rule them all. They're actually using one single release orchestration template with security embedded to release 300 applications into production, and they just implemented that in under a year. They also use the automation module to generate repeatable deployment plans, and that allowed them to even automate and standardize more. ABN AMRO had sort of a similar challenge. They didn't only need to release their software, build their software, but they had a lot of work updating their CMDB as well, interacting with their Nexus artifact repository. Building all of that in Jenkins would have been a huge effort, a lot of their own scripting, where these integrations are standard out-of-the-box functionalities in our platform. And they have now CD pipelines with over 100 applications onboarded for automated deployments. KeyBank, similar story. They overhauled the entire old platform, including using Jenkins, which they use in conjunction with OpenShift. But what they found, it didn't include the advanced access and process controls that they needed in their financial space. There were incidents where someone would create an extra job to do testing, and that test code found its way into production. So by using our platform, they did not only keep Jenkins to do what it was really good at, but they achieved their goal of combining speed and agility with fine-grained control that is part of our platform. So these are different stories that we have written up on our website, and it will be shared with you as well. Excellent. So it's a little bit of a recap here, but as well connecting it to, again, sort of touching base with Jenkins. We've been talking a lot about security. So what we really need in order to create a secure end-to-end pipeline that is visible, compliant, has a lot of intelligence built in, is that we need to connect Jenkins not just to your dev team, but all teams that have a role in the entire release pipeline, so all the way to production. And if you connect all these Jenkins pipeline to full release pipelines, as we like to call them, and see the dependencies, you actually get to that state where you have the visibility that you need, and you can actually use DevOps intelligence, the reporting capabilities of our platform to accelerate, to make sure that you address your bottlenecks. While you're doing that, you're enforcing compliance support, and you support audits. You deal with all of that wacky enterprise red tape that you really don't really want to spend a lot of time on without manual work and interruptions. And that makes developers generally happy. And you would think that developers just kind of have to roll with the process that's being laid out in front of them, but realize as well that as sort of the drivers of the process in the beginning, they have a lot of power to make things go faster or go slower, depending on how well it suits their world. I mentioned before that a standard practice in a lot of companies was that security teams would basically give them a huge set of security issues in a style that they were not familiar with jargon they were not familiar with. And that really slows down everything. So what we focus on to having this platform that is relatable to all these types of audiences, so that developers can use their Jenkins pipeline for everything that Jenkins is suitable for, which results into those self-service deployments. So that just makes it possible for developers to create their branch, create code, make sure that their feature is tested intermittently, that they have visibility on security issues as they're writing the code, and then go all the way to production, compliant in the way that the enterprise wants it, with the approvals in place in a super fast fashion. What I'll show you, I'll actually switch to the demo now, our DevOps platform that is focused on all these different roles. I'm not going to iterate on all of them, but basically all of your stakeholders in the release process. And we'll specifically focus on the DevOps spec for Jenkins, where we visualize basically what is happening in Jenkins. So that's the pipeline radar, the DevOps for the blueprints, risk scoring, release orchestration, deployment automation as well, and the compliance dashboard. Let's go ahead and switch gears here. So what we see right here is actually the Excel release platform that is connected to Jenkins. I'll explain a little bit what we're seeing here. So this is a dashboard with a lot of activity. So it requires a little bit of explanation. So what this basically visualizes for us is a release process where we have our cool store September delivery, which is in this case a little bit late, with 3 different components in there: the address book, the shopping cart, and the wish list. And what we see if we go further down to the right of this is that these different components have different Jira tickets as well. And this actually coincides with different branches that developers have in their code repository. And this is actually a very common practice to do. You can create a new branch as you're working on that story. What you see if you go a step even further to the right is that we have a visualization that for this branch, which pipelines actually were executed. So what we can basically do, we can connect to Jenkins. We can automatically see what are the different build jobs that you have. And the build jobs in a lot of situations are created automatically based on the branches you have. So we just mimic that. There's no excessive amount of setup to do here. You just basically point it to the application and the rest is automatically mapped for you. What you will see as if I would kick off a branch, and this is all mirrored to Jenkins that I, for example, have running here. So if I would kick off a different build job, which would normally be with, of course, a code build, what Excel release will do over time, it will automatically detect that that job is running and basically include it in the visibility of what you're basically doing here. What we make sure is that some of the visibility that Jenkins has, that in this case, you don't really want your compliance or your security people to have to switch to a different tool to have this comprehensive overview of everything that's happening here. So in this case, we make sure that that overview is included right here in Excel Deploy as well. So for every pipeline, I can basically connect and security, very important because it logged me out. And I can exactly see what kind of steps were done for that exact Jenkins build. And it's very similar to what you're going to see in your Blue Ocean, for example. So we make sure that you really have this one-stop shop where you're not only it's not only visible what your different compliance needs are, where your process is from that point of view, but as well very clearly what's happening in Jenkins. So what you really see here is all of the steps that we just saw in Jenkins, that they are being included in Excel release as well, seeing exactly where your failures happen as well. So this gets archived, and you have one cohesive view of everything that is happening here. So let's switch back to that overview. Give me just a second here, guys. Like I mentioned, what we focus a lot as well is on the compliance dashboards here. So what you see here is basically a folder representation of everything that is happening. I talked about that release that I'm doing for the cool store, the different subcomponents there. What you'll be able to see on the level of one of these folders, an exact tracking of how long your release duration is. So you see your progress over time across all of these different components. You see as well as your efficiency here. So where am I spending my time on? Is it mainly automated stuff, mainly manual stuff? And where am I really spending my time? So what you're seeing here is that the vast majority of time is in your manual activities, which is an opportunity for improvement. You get more visibility as well, the number of releases that you're running, average release duration, and what your longest task type is. Of course, this is something that you can drill down on as well. So for example, if I click on an individual component, I actually get a Jenkins pipeline value stream. So another representation of that process that we just saw, where we get a very clear overview as well, basically where you're spending your time. And this is as well where security comes into play. So why does Excel release, the part of our DevOps platform, give you additional overview of what your security risks might be? That's because we automatically, when a new build job is detected, we make sure that whatever is happening from a security perspective is automatically scanned as well and visualized as part of this dashboard as well. So actually, the scanning might be part of your development processes already, but having that one-stop shop overview of what your current specific release status is on your different branches, that's not something that's quite easy to achieve. You see that we integrate with multiple different solutions, Fortify as an example, as well as sort of Fortify on demand. So there's more potential to integrate with different solutions. It's not limited to that. As well as more overview on basically the pipelines that have been running in these folders. So basically all your different stages and how long they take. So again, to get the visibility on where you're spending your time. What you can see as well as you switch tabs here, you see the different releases that are running. So that's on the level of the pipelines. But there's something running on a higher level as well. This is actually really where the Jenkins pipelines connect to the rest of your process. So for example, if we dive into one specific feature that's being built, what you see is that primarily Excel release waits for a successful pipeline build. So actually this release is automatically spun up as Excel release sees a new branch being created in version control. So as developers start working on this, you already get visibility. Hey, there's someone working on a new feature. What we see here as well is that after the Jenkins pipeline would be successfully built, you can run additional security checks. For example, run through SonarQube to make sure for this build that has been created now, in this case might be merged to master, that everything still passes. You can explicitly create quality gates here. For example, go to Sonar, test for different type of compliancy things. So maybe your Jenkins builds are succeeding because the security settings have been changed by a developer for whatever reason. But right here in XO release, and this is something that developers aren't able to explicitly change if they don't have the permissions. This is all verified again, that these corporate standards are, satisfied. And it's just basically something that you can rely on and is part of the reports explicitly as well. Same goes for example, going through Fortify and checking compliance there. Black Duck, and there's another integration from a security perspective that we can go into. And what I mentioned before as well, as XO Deploy does deployments, it can actually integrate with solutions that tell it, hey, there are no vulnerabilities in this specific delivery, or maybe you want to allow certain vulnerabilities on your dev and test environments, but not on your higher environments. Other things, like I mentioned, for example, performance tests can be automatically made part of this pipeline as well. So it's not only executed automatically, the results are captured as well. So everything that happens as you run through this release process is actually kept in an activity log. So that means you have full compliance and auditability on everything that happened. And you don't need to make that extra round trip to Jenkins, because everything is actually captured in XO release because we track the Jenkins pipelines. So that just increases your visibility for you a lot. You see that you can do things like opening tickets as well, not specifically related to security, but is really handy to automate that entire process. Just want to show that adding an activity and integration is really focused to be on core functionality. So any solution that you want to integrate with, be it a part of your security process, part of your testing campaign, you can very easily select an integration for that. And as you select that integration, it will be part of that process. You will make sure that it's executed for you in an automatic fashion. And that's all captured and kept into the dashboards. Dashboards really focus on giving you visibility across your enterprise over time. So this is going to show all of the releases that have been running over time, where you're spending your time as well. Remember that we already took a look at some of the overviews at the level of the folder. And this is an example that's basically even higher level. So you can see all your different deliveries, basically how much time you spend doing that and what your longest task is, and where there might be opportunities to do a lot of improvement. So in combination of that, you will basically be able to have that release process embedded. And what is an important thing to mention as well, especially for those who are familiar with Jenkins pipelines, is that a lot of these pieces of code that or release processes I've been talking about, they are actually code as well. So we really focus on being a part of the as code movement. So any of these release processes that are being ran that have all of these security checks included in that can be represented as code and can actually be stored in Git just like your Jenkins file as well. So you can actually have a repository, of course, with appropriate permissions where you're managing all that information. And you can use a share template as well. You promote reuse, but you can use basically the as code perspective as well. So you don't have any maintenance specifically in XO release. You do that, basically track everything that is happening, as well as being aware of any manual activities that needs to be addressed. That leaves us with about 19 minutes, and I think that gives me a lot of nice opportunity to be able to answer some questions.
Yes, that was great. So let me get it started right off with the first question. And that is, what is the benefit of connecting Jenkins to all teams in the release pipeline?
Excellent, thank you for that. Excuse me. So the benefit of connecting Jenkins to everything in the pipelines is, again, the visibility. So instead of having to rely on another either person or another automated process to tell the release process what build jobs are being done, you tunnel into Jenkins directly as the different build jobs are spawning. It just creates a faster feedback loop, creates visibility for those stakeholders in your release process that do not really understand Jenkins, don't have access to Jenkins even. So, really your release managers, etc. They can live track everything that's happening, and they can see it in a familiar UI, what is specifically happening with that release process. So it's just generally the visibility across the pipeline.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, I'd like to remind our attendees that if you have a question, please type it into the control panel, questions tab, hit submit, and as I said earlier, we'll get to as many as time will allow. The second question, Vincent, would be, so how do you go about transitioning a team from DevOps to DevSecOps?
That is a very good one. So what you generally see is that the requirement or the necessity to actually transform a way of working to DevSecOps comes with the realization that there are delays in the process that are, related to any security activities there. So from a certain perspective, it's the same as transforming from a manual security process into a more automated one. What the key thing to do is to basically address and talk to your security people and let them know that that they're set up for failure right now, that it's really, really hard, maybe even impossible for them in their current way of working where they're checking everything manually to be successful. They have to be the bearer of bad news, to be that guy that has the long laundry list of issues. And to really collaborate with them and to explain to them, like, we really want to use your knowledge and embed that in an automated way into the process that we can actually, you don't get burned out being that guy with unintelligible questions and delaying projects and having to, sign off on certain things that might have vulnerabilities anyway, but actually be way more successful and actually be a very positive part of getting your enterprise to a higher level of delivering software in a faster and a more secure way.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So to follow up, so the question would be, how do organizations transition from manual security administration to an automated security infrastructure?
That's basically the same exact question formulated in a different way. From a certain perspective, DevOps is manual security and DevSecOps is more automated security. Mm-hmm. So the same applies, really talking to these security folks and making sure that their concerns are heard and understood, and allowing them to gain visibility on, okay, so how can we address that in an automated way? That's collaborating with them. Generally, developers help doing that as well, setting up it such a way that it can be executed automatically, where the security people more allow the policies to be defined, and not policies to be defined in a Word document, but really be defined in an automatic way. And that's basically solutions that allow you to do that. So selecting the right tools for that as well. And there are many tools out there that we can connect with and we can actually make part of the pipeline. So you don't have to be vendor locked in one specific solution. But the combination of really talking to them to understand the concerns, really showing them that slide as well, of the entire security pipeline, so they can reason about as well, okay, these things that I have to do manually now, I could do automatically in an earlier stage. And helping them select the right tooling. That's usually the approach in which you want to go and slowly move forward.
Great. So another attendee asks, so how do you overcome the challenge of not having active engagement from the security team when you're trying to develop applications using secure principles?
So generally, if you don't have engagement from the security team, that probably means that they're still quite a bit in defensive mode. It is a little bit the same as the approach that ops people used to have back in the day, where they try to block a lot of progress, and that's just an untenable position long term. So if there is a lack of security engagement, it probably means that there is a large bottleneck as well. generally education and making sure, again, to interact with these people to make sure that their concerns are heard, and that this is a trend in the industry, that they're not alone in trying to find what they're, in that case, if they're not really contributing, there's not a lot of engagement. It usually still means that they're almost in a state of denial. They think that it's still possible to halt the progress, to just say, no, I'm just going to do it in my old way. But by sharing a little bit more stories about what is happening in the industry, just maybe have knowledge sharing sessions or just informal speaking to them, would give them the insight of, okay, this is what I'm doing right now is untenable. And as we move forward, we really, really want to be engaged more in the process, because the risk ultimately comes to those people. And ultimately, they do want to live with a process that has as little risk as possible in an automated fashion, so that you can move forward. Does that answer that question?
I believe it did. So that's excellent. All right, so we've gone through all the questions that there were, and I just would throw it back to you, Vincent, if you have any last thoughts or takeaways for the attendees. If there's one thing they should leave this webinar with today, what would that be?
Excellent. So what I would really say is to make sure to underline that we really need the security people to get their knowledge out of their heads and into automated processes. We're not here to try to force things down their throat or move too fast, but really to create a collaboration. I mean, DevSecOps is an extension of DevOps to include the security culture. We really want to do something in collaboration and not an us versus them situation.
All right, well, I certainly would like to thank Vincent Lussenberg from XebiaLabs for a great presentation today, talking about the DevSecOps in the Jenkins pipeline. Certainly want to thank XebiaLabs itself for sponsoring today, and of course all of our attendees for hanging with us this morning. Until next time, I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times. So long for now.